The 1960s were a wild laboratory for Saturday morning TV, where rocket-powered whales, superhero parodies, and even presidential power fantasies flashed across the screen, sometimes for just a single season. Blink, and you missed them. But their ideas, strange, risky, sometimes infamous, still ripple through pop culture. Today, we're dusting off the reels and counting down 12 one-season oddities that pushed the decade's animation to its weirdest edges. Number 12, The Adventures of Gulliver, 1968 to 1969. Hanna-Barbera took Jonathan Swift's satirical giant and miniaturized him for one-season, 17-episode adventures built for ABC's weekend slot. The hook is simple and charming, a wholesome teen hero, shipwrecked, befriending tiny Lilliputian-style allies, and outwitting pirates and schemers in crisp, self-contained chases. What makes it bizarre isn't shock value, it's the tonal blend. Gothic menace never shows up. Instead, there's a dream-logic sweetness where size is both comedy and strategy. A flute trill, a sudden cut to a cliffside lair, and problems are solved by clever teamwork rather than heavy combat. An approach that mirrored late 60s network caution around on-screen violence in kids' shows. The series' brevity is part economics, part fashion change. ABC's lineup moved fast, and Gulliver's gentle storybook tone was quickly overshadowed by louder, zanier rivals. Yet its travelogue rhythms, puzzles of scale, improvised gadgets, tiny cavalry charges, proved sticky in memory. In reruns and later uploads, you can watch how the show compresses sweeping fantasy into 21 minutes without ever feeling cheap. The layouts and background art carry a soft adventure glow that became a Hanna-Barbera signature. One season later, it vanished from first-run broadcast, but the show's miniature meets Colossus grammar echoes in countless later action comedies, reminding us that bizarre can also be gentle, focused, and oddly serene. Number 11. The Beagles, 1966 to 1967. A canine pop duo spoofing Beatlemania should have been disposable, yet The Beagles is an artifact of TV's strangest crossroads: music, merchandising, and network taste. Total Television, the studio behind Underdog, built the show around Stringer and Tubby, a bickering act hustled through publicity capers and novelty tunes. It lasted a single season on CBS before bouncing into ABC reruns, and then, poof, practically disappeared. The real oddity isn't on screen, but off. For decades, the show flirted with lost media status. Masters were reportedly misplaced, and only later were original negatives and tracks said to have been rediscovered in a warehouse, fueling a cottage industry of fans trying to piece together the full run. That off-screen mystery amplified the show's cult pull. Scarcity made the jokes and songs feel like excavated pop. As for standards and practices, The Beagles wasn't a lightning rod for content, but it did sit in a shifting legal and corporate terrain. Music clearances and sponsor dynamics affected whether a short-lived music cartoon could live in syndication. In a media landscape now obsessed with IP longevity, a one-season musical oddball that nearly evaporated feels radical. Watch any surviving episode and clock the brisk timing, mock showbiz plots, and radio-friendly choruses. Then imagine a world where a top 10 adjacent Saturday morning curiosity vanishes not because it was hated, but because the machinery around it hiccuped. That's the weirdest part. It's a cartoon haunted by its own paper trail. Number 10. The Super 6, 1966 to 1967. Depatia Freleng's first Saturday morning vehicle is equal parts parody and time capsule, a heroes-for-hire agency that dispatches misfit do-gooders on 3 rapid-fire mini-adventures per episode. There's Super Booing, a guitar-strumming hero whose strings literally power his feats, and the delightfully off-kilter Brothers Mazzarilli, a 3-headed act trading punchlines inside one body. Only one season was produced, 20 episodes, but NBC reran it for years, proof that its comic rhythm stuck even as superhero cartoons hit turbulence with rising complaints about televised violence. What makes it bizarre isn't simply the gags, it's the structural gamble. The show mixes anthology pacing with a quasi-workplace premise, super services, Incus anticipating later meta-superhero comedy by decades. In a landscape dominated by cost-saving limited animation, the Super 6 turns constraints into style, boiled-down action beats, elastic sound gags, and a pop band intro that sells the tone like a TV theme song should. The one-season fact becomes part of the mystique. This was a sketchbook of superhero comedy ideas broadcast before networks retooled their Saturday mornings. Today, it reads like a proto-Teen Titans Go, filtered through mid-60s graphic design. Its rerun longevity versus its minimal production run is also a neat business footnote. Even a tiny library could be cycled until the fashion changed. Number 9. The Space Kidettes, 1966 to 1967. A club of junior rangers, Snoopy, Jenny, Countdown, and Scooter, patrols the cosmos from a capsule clubhouse with their dog, Pupstar. The tone is pure kid astronaut. Treasure maps, snickering pirates, and gadgeteered rescues. It's also a perfect example of one-season weirdness where the strangest story isn't entirely on screen. 20 episodes aired across a single season. Later, edits carved them into 10-minute chunks for syndication packages, and reports suggest the original master elements were lost, leaving those shortened TV prints as the best circulating versions. That accidental censorship by attrition sharpened the show's legend, not scandal or complaints, but library handling. Stylistically, this is Hanna-Barbera in a lab coat, applying their talk-and-chase formula to a Space Club fantasy-sized, exactly to a Saturday morning attention span. The Cadets Clubhouse, equal parts fort and rocket, is a miniature dream of competence, kids as mission control, arriving just as the real-world space race saturated headlines. One season was enough to stamp a mood, bright, beep-filled optimism, where friendship and cleverness beat blustering adults. The lost material's wrinkle adds a melancholy note, like a playground you can still visit, but only after someone shortened the slides and painted over the murals. Bizarre? Maybe not in premise, but in fate. A show that stayed G-rated, yet wound up pieced together by historians like a sci-fi ship made from spares. Number 8. Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossibles, 1966 to 1967. Only in the 1960s could you flip from a boy genius piloting a towering robot to a rock band moonlighting as crime fighters, all within the same half hour. That's the strange split format of Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossibles, Hanna-Barbera's experiment in blending superhero mania with mod-era pop culture. Frankenstein Jr. is a boy's dream machine. Buzz Conroy builds a towering robot companion that stomps villains into scrap. Meanwhile, the Impossibles are a trio of rockers who transform into Stretch, Coilman, and Fluidman, launching into battles between gigs. It's a show that never settled into one identity, and that became its charm and its curse. While kids loved the dual concept, critics saw it as too scattered, with tonal whiplash between the earnest robot fights and the comedic band antics. Networks also started feeling pressure about televised violence in cartoons, and Frankenstein Jr.'s frequent robot brawls drew concerned letters from parents. The Impossibles' wacky transformations softened things, but not enough. Despite vibrant design and an energetic theme tune, the show folded after one season, remembered more as a curiosity than a cornerstone. Yet its mismatched halves anticipated later cartoons that played with genre fusion. Proof that Hanna-Barbera, even in their strangest experiments, were always testing the edges of what kids' TV could be. Number 7. The Mighty Heroes, 1966 to 1967. Imagine superheroes so inept that their own rescue attempts become disasters, yet somehow they still save the day. That's The Mighty Heroes, a Terry Toons creation led by a young Ralph Bakshi, who would later reinvent animation in the 1970s. The lineup, Strong Man, Rope Man, Tornado Man, Cuckoo Man, and Diaper Man, sounds like a parody sketch, and in truth, it was. Each episode began with the heroes bumbling into chaos, tangling themselves up in slapstick antics, only to stumble into accidental victory. Its single season of 21 shorts wasn't due to a lack of charm. Kids loved the absurdity, but network executives weren't sure how to market a superhero show that mocked its own genre during the very height of superhero popularity. Standards and practices rarely objected, since violence was more suggested than shown, but the absurdity made it difficult to sell toys or merchandise. Despite this, the series found life in reruns and left an odd mark on animation history as one of the first outright superhero satires. Long before The Tick or Teen Titans Go proved parody could thrive, the mighty heroes showed the template, heroes who were laughable, lovable, and bizarrely effective, all in the span of just one unforgettable season. Number 6. Milton the Monster, 1965 to 1966. In an era obsessed with monsters as comedy, Milton the Monster carved its place by making its creation the opposite of scary. Produced by Hal Seeger, the cartoon followed Professor Weirdo and Count Kook, two mad scientists, as they accidentally brewed too much tincture of tenderness into their cauldron, giving life to the kind, gentle, and bumbling Milton. With his flat-top head puffing steam, Milton looked like a parody of Frankenstein's monster, but he giggled and apologized his way through gothic settings. The show lasted only 26 episodes across one season, but its weird tonal balance set it apart. Parents' groups and censors kept a closer eye on spooky content, and Milton often danced around complaints that its sinister settings might frighten younger viewers. Yet the show doubled down on humor, turning horror tropes into silly sidekicks, like Hebe and Jeeby, a pair of oddball henchmen. Its one-season fate had more to do with the crowded monster comedy market than outright failure, competing with sitcoms like The Addams Family and The Munsters. Still, Milton's catchphrases and his oddly endearing personality made him memorable. Looking back, the series feels like a satire of horror itself, a Halloween special stretched across a season, bizarre in concept, but too sweet to scare away. Number 5. Moby Dick and Mighty Mightor, 1967 to 1968. Hanna-Barbera loved the two shows in one format, and this odd pairing is one of their strangest. On one side was Moby Dick, a futuristic underwater adventure with teen divers Tub and Tom teaming up with a heroic white whale. On the other, Mighty Mightor told the story of a prehistoric teenager gifted a magic club that transformed him into a caped superhero. The contrasts were startling. Half the show was sleek, science fiction diving gear and sea monsters, while the other half was Stone Age villages and dinosaurs. Though creative, the combination confused audiences, and both segments drew mild controversy. Some parents worried the constant use of clubs and monster battles leaned too violent for Saturday mornings, while critics claimed it was just a recycling of ideas from other Hanna-Barbera hits. The one-season lifespan came from rising costs and shifting tastes, as networks leaned toward lighter comedies rather than action-heavy adventure shows. Yet the legacy remains. Mightor's design influenced later barbarian-style heroes, while Moby Dick stood out as one of the first attempts to make the classic whale into a children's adventure ally. One season, two worlds, and a legacy of strangeness that only Hanna-Barbera could pull off. Number 4. Space Angel, 1962 to 1964. If one show epitomizes the word bizarre, it's Space Angel, a science fiction cartoon that used synchrovox, an unsettling technique where live-action mouths were superimposed onto still-drawn faces. The result? Characters whose lips looked oddly real against stiff, unmoving bodies. It created an eerie, almost hypnotic viewing experience. The premise followed Scott McCloud, alias Space Angel, a pilot for the Interplanetary Space Force, tackling cosmic threats in serialized adventures. While the animation was rudimentary, its stories leaned surprisingly dark, filled with espionage, sabotage, and the looming paranoia of the Cold War. Some stations worried about its tone, deeming the visuals too unsettling for younger children. Despite that, the series reflected the decade's fascination with space exploration, blending pulp heroics with technological optimism. Its single-season status wasn't due to controversy alone, but also the high cost and limited appeal of its experimental animation style. Yet Space Angel left its mark, remembered not for its stories, but for its uncanny presentation. Long before Uncanny Valley was common, this series embodied it, making it one of the strangest one-season wonders of the 1960s. Number 3. The Space Kidettes, 1966 to 1967. The mid-1960s brought a rush of space-themed children's shows, but the Space Kidettes stood apart with its strange combination of optimism and accidental obscurity. 4 child astronauts, Countdown, Scooter, Snoopy, and Jenny, operated from their capsule clubhouse, accompanied by their loyal pup Pupstar. Each week they clashed with bumbling space pirates, relying on teamwork and gadgets to outwit villains. On the surface it was wholesome fun, timed perfectly with the real-world space race. But the show's fate turned bizarre when, years later, the original master tapes were reportedly lost. What survived were edited-down syndication versions, stripped of certain segments to fit into rerun packages. That accidental erasure gave the cartoon a reputation as partly missing, making it more of a curiosity than a staple. Censorship wasn't the issue. Its adventures were mild compared to contemporaries. But the behind-the-scenes mishandling became its oddest legacy. In just one season, it showcased Hanna-Barbera's flair for colorful optimism while foreshadowing the strange fragility of TV preservation. The Space Kidettes may not have terrified parents or sparked scandal, but it proved that sometimes what happens off-screen can be far weirder than what happens on it. Number 2. Jonny Quest, 1964 to 1965. Few one-season wonders loom larger than Jonny Quest. Sleek, cinematic, and wildly expensive, it was Hanna-Barbera's bold attempt to create a deep, primetime action-adventure series that could rival live-action television. Following Johnny, his scientist father, bodyguard Race Bannon, and friend Haji, the series zipped across the globe, battling spies, robots, mummies, and strange creatures. The art style was sharp and realistic, inspired by comic book aesthetics, and it instantly set the show apart. But the ambition that made it legendary also sealed its fate. Each episode cost far more than typical cartoons, and ABC balked at the mounting expenses. Controversy also brewed. Watchdog groups flagged its depictions of gunplay, hand-to-hand combat, and moments of peril as too intense for children. In response, the show was canceled after just 26 episodes. Ironically, cancellation cemented its mystique. Through reruns, Jonny Quest became a cult phenomenon, influencing generations of animators and action cartoons from Batman, the animated series, to the Venture Brothers. It's bizarre not because it was silly or strange, but because a show so polished, so ahead of its time, lasted only one season. Sometimes, greatness burns too brightly to last. Number 1. Space Ghost, 1966 to 1967. At the top of the list sits Space Ghost, one of Hanna-Barbera's most hauntingly strange yet enduring creations. Conceived as a straightforward superhero adventure, the show featured the cloaked hero Space Ghost battling cosmic villains with the help of teen sidekicks Jan and Jace, plus their monkey, Blip. The art was bold, with Alex Toth's designs lending the hero an otherworldly gravitas. But its single season of production reflected the era's growing fatigue with action-heavy Saturday morning programming. Critics questioned the repetitive formula of capture and rescue plots, while parental groups raised concerns over the laser battles and perilous cliffhangers. Despite lasting only 20 episodes, the show developed a reputation that far exceeded its run. It was later resurrected in reruns and, decades on, reimagined as the surreal parody Space Ghost Coast to Coast, proving its bizarre staying power. The original series straddled two worlds, earnest superhero storytelling, and unintentional camp. Its brief existence underscored how networks were willing to experiment with bold, visual-driven adventure only to retreat when controversy or costs loomed. In hindsight, its single season feels less like a failure and more like a prototype for everything that would come after in animated superhero history. From Lost Masters to parody superheroes, from robots to space angels, these 12 bizarre one-season wonders show how experimental, risky, and unforgettable 1960s animation truly was. Which of these oddities do you remember or wish you could see restored? Subscribe, like, and join us for more dives into television's strangest treasures.